In the history of British politics, there are moments that stand out not just as passing controversies, but as seismic turning points, events that ripple far beyond the walls of Westminster and reach into the very fabric of society. The recent no-confidence vote against Keir Starmer is one such moment, a storm that has shaken the Labour Party to its core, igniting debates across every television studio, every pub, every union hall, and every corner of the United Kingdom. To fully understand the scale of this collapse in leadership, we need to step back and examine not only the vote itself, but also the deep political, cultural, and psychological forces that converged to create this crisis. What unfolded was not merely a parliamentary maneuver. It was the culmination of years of distrust, broken promises, and unresolved wounds from one of the most divisive political events in modern British history: Brexit. Starmer, who only a few years ago stood as the symbol of calm competence after the chaos of the Corbyn years, is now fighting for his political survival, wounded and vulnerable, his credibility hanging by a thread. His collapse is not sudden, though on the surface it may appear that way. It is the product of a slow-burning fuse lit back in 2016 when the Brexit referendum split the nation in half. On one side stood millions of working-class voters, particularly from former industrial heartlands in the North and Midlands, who believed the European Union had stripped Britain of its sovereignty, undermined local jobs, and left communities struggling. On the other side were metropolitan voters, students, and professionals in London and other major cities who feared that leaving the EU would cripple the economy, isolate Britain diplomatically, and shrink opportunities for the next generation. That divide became a political scar, and every attempt to heal it since has left vacant wounds. When Jeremy Corbyn faltered under the weight of his indecision on Brexit, promising one thing one day, another the next, Labour's heartlands turned blue for the first time in decades. The so-called Red Wall crumbled, and constituencies that had voted Labour loyally since the Second World War suddenly backed Boris Johnson and his simple, almost brutal promise: get Brexit done. The humiliation of 2019 became etched into Labour's soul, and when Starmer stepped forward in 2020 as a new leader, he carried with him a very clear mission: end the Brexit wars, restore Labour's credibility, and rebuild the fragile bridge to voters who felt abandoned. For a while, it seemed he might succeed. His lawyerly precision, his calm tone, his deliberate promises not to reopen old wounds, reassured people that Labour had learned its lesson. "We respect the referendum," he said repeatedly. "We will not seek to rejoin the EU. We will not push for a second vote." It was a message crafted not for the activists in London, but for the steelworkers in Redcar, the families in Sunderland, the miners' sons and daughters in Stoke-on-Trent, people who had felt sneered at, ridiculed, and disregarded by the political elite when they voted Leave. But politics, especially British politics, rarely stays still. Behind the scenes, a tension simmered. Many Labour MPs, particularly those representing London and university towns, still believed passionately that Brexit had been a mistake. They pointed to higher prices in the supermarkets, red tape strangling small businesses, British fishermen complaining that promises were broken, and a visible drop in foreign investment. To them, it was obvious. Leaving the EU had left the country weaker, poorer, and more isolated. They whispered, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly in private rooms, that one day Labour would have to tell the truth. Britain needed closer ties with Europe again. And so the battle lines were drawn, not between Labour and Conservative, not even between government and opposition, but within Labour itself. On one side, the pragmatists like Starmer, who knew the electoral danger of reopening the Brexit wound. On the other side, the idealists and Europhiles, who refused to give up the dream of reversing what they saw as a historic blunder. The crisis reached boiling point with a single leak. A 47-page strategy paper, dry and technical in its language, but explosive in its implications, found its way into the press. It detailed potential policies a future Labour government might pursue, extending fishing rights deals with the EU to 2035, aligning food standards with European regulations, cooperating on environmental policies, restoring student exchange programs, even allowing certain trade disputes to be influenced by the European Court of Justice. On paper, these were modest, pragmatic steps, nothing that technically reversed Brexit. But in politics, perception is everything, and perception turned deadly. To the average voter in Hartlepool, Grimsby, or Sunderland, these proposals felt like betrayal dressed up in polite words. It wasn't about fish or food standards. It was about sovereignty, pride, and trust. And trust, once broken, is rarely repaired. Within hours, the backlash began. Constituency Labour parties held emergency meetings. Angry voters confronted MPs in car parks, and viral videos spread across social media like wildfire. "You promised you wouldn't betray us again," one man shouted outside a town hall, his voice shaking with rage. It was a raw reminder of just how personal Brexit still is for millions of people. It wasn't a policy debate. It was about respect, about being heard, about whether London politicians truly understood the struggles of working-class Britain. Inside Parliament, the anger was even sharper. MPs from Brexit constituencies, many of whom had spent years painstakingly rebuilding trust with their voters, suddenly felt exposed and vulnerable. Their worst nightmare had come true. Their own leader had given their opponents the perfect weapon. Nigel Farage, ever the opportunist, seized the moment, branding the leak Labour's Brexit betrayal and promising that Reform UK would stand up for the people where Labour had failed. Poll numbers moved almost instantly, with Reform climbing from the margins into the mainstream, threatening to split the working-class vote and deliver seats back to the Conservatives. It was against this backdrop that 27 Labour MPs, some of them seasoned figures, others newer faces desperate to protect fragile seats, signed the motion of no confidence in their leader. This wasn't a minor rebellion or a symbolic protest. In the ruthless world of Westminster, it was a political execution attempt, a clear signal that they no longer trusted Starmer to lead them into the next election without disaster. And in many ways, it was inevitable. Starmer had made one promise above all others: no more Brexit wars. By even appearing to drift from that promise, he cracked the fragile truce he had built, and the consequences were immediate, brutal, and possibly fatal to his leadership. The Labour Party was no longer united against the Conservatives. It was tearing itself apart from the inside, replaying the same tragic mistakes that had already cost it power once before. What unfolded on that tense Wednesday night in Committee Room 14 of the House of Commons was more than a vote count. It was a reckoning. MPs filed in, their faces grim, their eyes betraying the weight of the decision. On one side, loyalty to a leader who had brought them back from the brink. On the other, fear of electoral suicide if they were seen to support a man voters no longer trusted on the defining issue of a generation. Starmer himself looked weary, almost ghost-like, as though the past 3 weeks had drained every ounce of his resolve. The final tally, 127 votes for confidence, 124 against, 3 abstentions, left him technically alive as leader, but politically mortally wounded. A margin of 3 votes is no victory. It is a death sentence delayed. Opponents smelled blood. Allies whispered doubts. And the press wasted no time in declaring him a dead man walking. And yet, beneath the numbers lies a deeper story, one that reveals the very soul of British democracy. The crisis is not just about Starmer or Labour. It is about Brexit itself, an issue that refuses to die, that continues to haunt every leader who dares to touch it. Voters who feel betrayed do not forgive easily. They carry their anger into the ballot box, into protest movements, into political parties that once seemed fringe, but now stand on the brink of real power. In this way, the no-confidence vote is more than a political drama. It is a mirror, reflecting back the fractures, the mistrust, and the unresolved conflicts of a nation still grappling with the consequences of its most momentous decision in decades. And for Keir Starmer, it marks the beginning of what may be the final brutal chapter of his leadership, a chapter written not by speeches in Parliament, but by the unforgiving judgment of the voters he once promised never to betray. The night of the no-confidence vote ended, not with clarity but with confusion, not with resolution, but with the sharp sting of uncertainty. In politics, survival is often celebrated as victory. But what Keir Starmer endured was something altogether different. To scrape through by 3 votes is not to win. It is to be left standing only because no one has yet decided who will strike the final blow. The Labour leader emerged from Committee Room 14 technically intact, but as he walked down the corridors of Westminster that night, his face pale under the glare of television lights, it was clear he had lost something far more precious than a single ballot. He had lost the aura of inevitability. Leaders thrive on the perception of strength, of momentum, of destiny. When that aura shatters, even loyal allies begin to drift away, calculating whether their future lies with a wounded chief or with the next contender waiting in the wings. In the immediate hours after the vote, Labour's divisions spilled into the open. Constituency chairs from Sunderland, Hartlepool, and Grimsby resigned in dramatic fashion, issuing blistering public letters that accused Starmer of betraying the very voters who had once given Labour its soul. "This is not just about trade deals or fishing rights," one resignation letter read. "This is about trust, and Keir Starmer has broken it." On social media, the words spread like wildfire, shared thousands of times by activists, journalists, and voters who had long suspected that Labour's promises on Brexit were little more than political theatre. For years, Starmer had tried to straddle 2 irreconcilable worlds: the working-class Brexiteers of the North and the pro-EU progressives of London. Now, both sides were beginning to doubt him. The unions, traditionally Labour's most reliable power base, reacted with visible unease. Unite, the largest and most influential of them all, warned publicly that Labour must remember who our voters are and what they voted for. Behind closed doors, union leaders were even blunter, telling shadow cabinet members that if Starmer continued down the road of EU alignment, they would reconsider their